The groom's thumb brushed across my wrist as I reached for the pen at the marriage bureau, and I froze, praying he hadn't felt the birthmark, the tiny flaw that Isabella didn't have. His touch lingered half a second too long before he released me, his dark eyes unreadable as Napa wine cellars, and I forced myself to breathe normally while my heart hammered against my ribs. The little netted veil on my cream fascinator cast shadows across my face, a small mercy, but my wrists were bare and exposed. When the clerk asked for identification, I had no choice but to slide my driver's license across the counter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Isabetta, not Isabella. The clerk had never seen the alliance contracts with Isabella typed in elegant serif. All she cared about was that the name she entered matched the one on my license, Isabetta. I watched his gaze drop to the name, watched something flicker across his expression, too quick to read, too controlled to interpret, and told myself the names were close enough, that a man who'd never met either of us wouldn't catch the single missing letter. He said nothing, just shifted his attention back to the paperwork, and I exhaled carefully, tugging at Isabella's cream suit jacket, where it sat just slightly loose at my waist. When he picked up the pen and signed his own name in dark, deliberate strokes, the silence between us felt like standing on ice that might crack at any moment. The clerk congratulated us, "Mr. and Mrs. Calabresi, best wishes to you both," and stepped out to process the documents. And I realized I'd just legally bound myself to a man whose first name I'd only seen once, signed in dark ink, Dante. When the groom finally turned to face me fully, his gaze dropping briefly to my wrist before meeting my eyes again, something in his expression made me wonder if I'd just gotten away with everything or nothing at all. 3 days earlier, I'd stood in Isabella's bedroom watching my twin sister cry into her phone, while her boyfriend begged her not to go through with the marriage. I wasn't supposed to be listening, but our father's estate had thin walls and thinner patience for disobedience. The arranged marriage to the Calabresi heir was supposed to end the feud that had soaked Napa Valley vineyards in blood for 3 generations. Isabella was the chosen one, the beautiful firstborn twin, who'd spent her whole life being groomed for exactly this kind of sacrifice. I was the spare, the one who handled logistics, and smoothed over family disasters and made sure everyone else's life ran without friction. "I can't do this," Isabella had whispered into the phone, mascara streaking down her face. "I love you. I can't marry someone else." I'd knocked softly and let myself in. She'd looked up at me with desperate, drowning eyes, and I'd understood immediately that if I didn't do something, my sister would shatter. Or worse, she'd run, and our father would hunt her down and drag her back, and the Calabrese family would see it as the ultimate insult. The wedding was in 4 days. The marriage license appointment was in 3. "What if you didn't have to?" I'd asked quietly. The plan had come together fast. I'd told Isabella I wanted to take her out for one last girls' night before the wedding, something to calm her nerves. Our mother had been suspicious, but ultimately agreed, probably relieved that someone was managing Isabella's obvious panic. What our mother didn't know was that Isabella's boyfriend would be waiting at the restaurant with 2 tickets to Paris and a plan to disappear into Europe where neither family could easily reach them. Then I'd driven home alone and told our mother Isabella had food poisoning and was staying at my apartment for the night. The next morning, I'd shown up at our family estate, dressed in one of Isabella's outfits, my hair styled the way she always wore hers. Our mother had found me in Isabella's room, and her face had gone white. "What are you doing?" "Isabella's gone," I'd said calmly, even though my pulse was racing. "She left last night with Lorenzo. They're probably in Paris by now." My mother had sunk onto the bed, her hands shaking. "Your father will kill her. He'll send men after her. And the Calabresi family, Isabetta, do you understand what this means? They'll see it as a declaration of war. Not if someone still shows up to sign the marriage license," I'd said. "Not if the alliance stays intact on paper." She'd stared at me for a long moment, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You can't. They'll know. You don't look exactly alike. We're identical twins. He's never met either of us. The names are close enough. The birthmark is tiny and on my wrist. Most men don't notice details like that the first time they meet a bride." My mother had grabbed my shoulders, her grip almost painful. "Do you understand they'll kill you if they find out? Both families will want you dead. Ours, for the dishonor. His, for the insult. I know. Then why? I'd met her gaze steadily. Because Isabella would die in that marriage. Because this way, at least she gets to live. And because someone has to stop this valley from bleeding. My mother had tested me for another 10 minutes, asking sharp questions about whether I understood the risk, whether I was prepared to play this role permanently, whether I truly grasped that there would be no escape if the deception was discovered. I'd answered every question calmly and clearly, the same way I always handled family crises. Eventually, she'd realized I wasn't going to be talked out of it. If you do this, she'd finally said, her voice breaking, you have to be perfect. Every moment, every word, you have to become Isabella. I've been managing her life for years, I'd reminded her gently. I know how she moves, how she talks, what she likes. I planned her entire wedding while she was falling apart. I can do this. I already know which cousins to keep close, which staff will keep their mouths shut, and which details can never slip. So I'd put on Isabella's cream suit, the one she'd bought for the license appointment. It was slightly too big in the waist, but not obviously so. I'd added the fascinator with the small veil, partly for style and partly to cast shadows across my face. And I'd driven to the Napa County Clerk's office with my mother's final warning ringing in my ears. If this falls apart, I can't protect you. Now, standing in the courthouse with the marriage license signed and legal, I watched the groom study me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He was taller than I'd expected from the photos, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of controlled stillness that suggested violence held on a very short leash. The photos hadn't captured the way he commanded space, or the intelligence in his dark eyes, or the sense that he saw far more than he let on. Your mother didn't come, he said finally. His voice was deep, with a faint roughness that suggested too many late nights and too much whiskey. She wasn't feeling well, I replied, keeping my tone light and pleasant, the way Isabella always did when she was nervous. She sends her apologies. And your father? Thought it best to keep things simple, less formal. He nodded slowly, still watching me with that unnerving focus. Simple. Yes, that's one word for it. The clerk returned with our certified marriage license, all official stamps and legal language declaring us husband and wife. I accepted my copy with a smile that felt like it might crack my face, and the groom tucked his into the inner pocket of his suit jacket without looking away from me. My car is outside, he said. We should go. Go where? My estate. Unless you'd prefer to return to your family home? There was something in the way he phrased it, like he was testing me, waiting to see how I'd respond. No, I said quickly, too quickly. Your estate is fine. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. Good, because we have things to discuss. He placed his hand on the small of my back, a possessive gesture that sent heat racing up my spine, and guided me toward the exit. His palm was warm through Isabella's suit jacket, and I was hyper-aware of every point of contact, every breath, every step. When we reached the courthouse steps, bright Napa sunlight made me squint, and I stumbled slightly on the second step. His hand moved instantly from my back to my elbow, steadying me with easy strength. Careful, he murmured, and his thumb brushed across the inside of my wrist again, right over the birthmark, as if he were confirming something. My heart stopped, then started again, too fast. He led me to a black Mercedes with tinted windows, opened the passenger door, and waited until I was settled before closing it with deliberate care. When he slid into the driver's seat, the space suddenly felt too small, too intimate. He started the engine but didn't immediately pull out of the parking space. Instead, he turned to look at me fully, his gaze moving from my face down to my hands folded carefully in my lap. You're nervous, he observed. It's a big day, I managed. Yes, it is. He paused, and the silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut. Tell me something, Isabetta. The use of my real name hit me like a fist to the stomach. Every muscle in my body locked. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at him while my entire world collapsed. He watched my reaction with that same calm, calculating expression, then reached across the console and took my left wrist in his hand. his thumb pressing gently against the small birthmark. This mark, he said quietly, wasn't in any of the photos I received of my bride. And the name on your identification is Isabetta, not Isabella. He released my wrist and leaned back in his seat, still watching me with those unreadable dark eyes. So, before we go any further, I think you owe me an explanation. I couldn't form words. My throat had closed, my mind had gone blank, and all I could do was stare at him while every instinct screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. We were alone in his car, parked outside a courthouse, where we'd just legally bound ourselves together, and he was looking at me like I was a puzzle he'd already solved. "I'm waiting," he said, his voice still calm, still quiet, but with an edge that suggested his patience had limits. I forced myself to breathe, to think. He knew my real name, knew about the birthmark, and he'd still sign the marriage license. That had to mean something. If he'd wanted to expose me immediately, he could have done it in front of the clerk, in front of witnesses. Instead, he'd waited until we were alone. "My sister," I began, then stopped, searching for the right words. "Isabella, she couldn't go through with it," he finished. "So you took her place." "She would have died in this marriage," I said, the words coming faster now. Not literally, maybe, but everything that made her herself would have been destroyed. She's in love with someone else, really in love, and I couldn't just let her be sacrificed when there was another option. Another option being you. Yes. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving my face. "And you thought I wouldn't notice the substitution. I thought you'd never met either of us, that the names were similar enough, that maybe," I swallowed hard, "I hoped you wouldn't look too closely." "I look closely at everything," he said, "especially at deals that are supposed to save my family from a war." He started the car and pulled out of the parking space with smooth, controlled movements. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come to my estate. You're going to play the role of my wife perfectly, in front of my family, in front of yours, in front of everyone. And you're going to tell me the complete truth about everything, even while you lie to the rest of the world. And if I refuse," his hands tightened briefly on the steering wheel, "then I expose the deception to both families. Your sister gets hunted down wherever she's hiding, and you die for the insult. Your mother probably dies too for helping you. The alliance collapses, and Napa bleeds. Is that what you want? No. Then we have a deal." I stared at his profile as he drove, trying to understand him. "Why didn't you stop the signing? Why go through with it at all if you knew?" "Because exposing you in that moment would have meant your immediate death and my public humiliation," he said flatly. "Neither outcome serves my interests. This way, the alliance stays intact on paper. The feud stays contained. And I get a wife who understands exactly how precarious her position is." The words landed like stones in my stomach. He'd calculated all of it in seconds, weighed the options, chosen the path that gave him the most control. I should have been terrified. I was terrified. But underneath the fear was something else. Reluctant respect, maybe. Or recognition that I'd just bound myself to someone who thought the way I did, who saw problems as puzzles to solve, rather than disasters to panic over. Dante Calabresi. That was his name. I'd seen it on the marriage license, signed in dark, deliberate strokes next to my own name, Isabetta. Close enough to Isabella that I'd gambled he wouldn't notice the missing letters. "What do you want from me?" I asked quietly. "The truth, loyalty, competence." He glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Your sister was raised to be decorative, useful for photos and formal dinners, but not much else. You, on the other hand, have been managing her life and your family's crises for years. I did my research, Isabetta. I know you're the one who actually runs things behind the scenes." That startled me. "You researched both of us?" "I research everything. It's why I'm still alive." He turned onto a private road that wound up into the hills overlooking the valley. "So here's the reality. You're going to use those skills for me now. You're going to read the room at family dinners, manage the volatile personalities, smooth over tensions. You're going to help me hold this fragile piece together. And in return, I protect you. I protect your mother, and I make sure no one ever hunts down Isabella. That's the deal? That's the deal. I stared out at the neat rows of vines appearing through the windshield, every branch a reminder that there was no version of this where I walked away clean. Run, and my family died. Stay, and I gambled everything on a man who'd just turned my deception into leverage. Fine, I said quietly. I'll do it. I turned it over in my mind, looking for the trap. There had to be a trap. And if I make a mistake, if someone figures out I'm not Isabella, then we both have a problem, he said. Which means it's in my interest to make sure that doesn't happen. I'll coach you on anything you need to know about my family, my business, the expectations. You'll have access to information Isabella never would have had. Because I need you functional, not decorative. The road opened up to reveal a sprawling estate, all stone and modern glass, with vineyards stretching out in neat rows on either side. It was beautiful in a stark, controlled way that somehow matched the man beside me perfectly. He parked in front of the main house and turned to face me fully. One more thing. When we're alone, you're Isabetta. When we're in front of anyone else, family, staff, business associates, you're Isabella. Can you handle that? Yes. Good. He got out of the car and came around to open my door, offering his hand. When I took it, his grip was firm and warm, and he pulled me to my feet with easy strength. Welcome home, wife. The words sent a shiver down my spine that I absolutely did not want to examine too closely. He led me inside, through a foyer with soaring ceilings and carefully curated art, into a sitting room that overlooked the vineyards. A woman in her 50s appeared almost immediately. His housekeeper, I assumed. Mrs. Alberti, this is my wife, Isabella, Dante said, with such smooth confidence that I almost believed it myself. Mrs. Calabrese will be staying in the main suite, he told the housekeeper. Please make sure she has everything she needs. The housekeeper smiled warmly at me. Of course. Welcome, Mrs. Calabrese. It's wonderful to finally meet you. I returned the smile, channeling every bit of Isabella's practiced charm. Thank you. The estate is beautiful. Your husband has excellent taste, she said, with obvious affection for him. I'll have your things brought up from the car. Oh, but you didn't bring luggage. It's being delivered later, he said smoothly. She wanted to keep the license appointment simple. The housekeeper nodded and disappeared, and I was alone with him again. He poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle that probably cost more than my monthly salary and handed one to me. "Too simple," he said, his tone dry. I clinked my glass against his, the irony not lost on me. Too simple. The wine was dark and complex, with layers I couldn't begin to identify. I took a small sip and tried not to think about the fact that I was standing in a stranger's house, wearing my sister's clothes, drinking wine with a man who held my life in his hands. You'll meet my family tomorrow night, he said, settling into a leather chair and gesturing for me to sit across from him. Dinner, formal. They'll be assessing you, looking for any sign that you're not suitable or that the alliance is weak. What should I know? My uncle Franco is the underboss. He didn't want this marriage. He thinks peace makes us soft, and he's been positioning himself to take over if I show any sign of weakness. He'll be watching you closely, looking for cracks. What does he look like? Late 50s, gray at the temples, always wears a pinky ring with the family crest. He smiles a lot, but it never reaches his eyes. He paused. If he asks you personal questions about your family or your childhood, deflect. Give pleasant non-answers. Don't give him ammunition. I nodded, filing the information away. Anyone else I should worry about? My cousin Luca. He's Franco's son, and he's ambitious. Not particularly bright, but dangerous because he's impulsive. He might try to test you, push boundaries, see how far he can go before I step in. And will you step in? His gaze sharpened. You're my wife. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. Yes, I'll step in. The certainty in his voice did something strange to my chest. I took another sip of wine to cover my reaction and asked, what about allies? Anyone I can trust? My sister, Adriana. She's younger, smarter than she pretends to be, and she actually wanted this alliance to work. She'll probably try to befriend you. Let her. He leaned back in his chair, studying me over the rim of his wineglass. And there's Marco Romano, my consigliere. He knows how to read people, so be careful around him. But if he decides he likes you, he'll be a valuable ally. Does he know about the switch? No. No one knows except you, me, and presumably your mother. He set his glass down. And it stays that way. Understood. We sat in silence for a moment, and I used the time to study him properly. He had the kind of face that probably looked severe, even when he smiled. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that seemed made for delivering ultimatums. But there was something compelling about him too. A magnetic quality that had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness, and everything to do with the way he commanded space and attention without apparent effort. "You're staring," he observed. "So are you." His mouth curved slightly. Fair enough. He stood and moved to the window, looking out over the vineyards with his hands in his pockets. "Tell me about the escape plan. How did you get Isabella out without your father noticing?" I explained the fake girls' night, the boyfriend waiting at the restaurant, the lie about food poisoning. He listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "Clever," he said when I finished. "Risky, but clever. How long do you think before your father realizes she's really gone?" Isabella was supposed to call him this morning from my apartment. I had a friend do it. Someone who sounds enough like her to pass over the phone. That buys us maybe 2 more days before he gets suspicious and sends someone to check. And when he finds out? By then, the marriage will be legal and, as far as my father is concerned, consummated. I stopped, my face heating. Well, legal anyway. And he'll have to decide whether it's worth destroying the alliance over. He turned from the window, his gaze intense. "About that. We'll share the main. Sweet for appearances. But I'm not going to touch you. Not like that. Not until—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Not until you want me to." The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Why? Because I need you functional and focused, not terrified and resentful. He crossed back to where I sat, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "And because when I take you to bed, Isabetta, I want it to be because you chose it, not because you were trapped into it." My breath caught. The way he said my name, low and deliberate, did something to my pulse that I absolutely could not afford. He was dangerous, controlled, and holding my life in his hands. I should not be having any kind of physical reaction to him. But apparently, my body hadn't received that memo. "The housekeeper will show you to our room," he continued, his voice returning to businesslike. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be difficult, and you need to be sharp." He left me sitting there with my half-finished wine and my racing thoughts, and I understood with sudden, uncomfortable clarity that the chemistry between us might be just as dangerous as the deception we were maintaining. The main suite was enormous, all dark wood and soft lighting, with a massive bed that dominated the space and a sitting area that included a fireplace and 2 leather chairs. The housekeeper had laid out a silk nightgown that definitely hadn't belonged to me, and I changed into it, feeling like an imposter in someone else's life, which I supposed I was. I was standing at the window looking out over the darkening vineyards when he came in. He'd changed into dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and the casual elegance of it somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Haven't tried yet." He moved to stand beside me at the window, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his body. "What are you thinking about? How many ways this could go wrong?" "That's fair." He was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think you can pull this off. You're smarter than most people in my world, and you think before you act. That's rare. You barely know me. I know you orchestrated an escape plan that required precise timing and nerves of steel. I know you walked into that courthouse, knowing you might die, and signed the papers anyway. I know you're standing here now, in enemy territory, still thinking about how to protect your family instead of just saving yourself." He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. That tells me everything I need to know. The praise shouldn't have mattered. He was still the man forcing me to play this role, still the one holding all the power. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at me like he actually saw me, not Isabella, not a useful tool, but me, made warmth bloom in my chest despite everything. Thank you, I managed. Don't thank me yet, he said. Tomorrow you meet the family. That's when the real test begins. He moved toward the door that connected to what I assumed was a dressing room or second bedroom, then paused. Isabetta, one more thing. Yes? At dinner tomorrow, if Franco tries to bait you or make you uncomfortable, hold your ground. Don't back down, but don't escalate. Show them you're not intimidated, but that you're smart enough not to start a war over petty provocations. Is that what Isabella would do? I don't care what Isabella would do, he said. I care what you'll do. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the fact that my dangerous new husband apparently wanted me to be myself, not my sister. I should have found that comforting. Instead, it terrified me more than anything else that had happened today. Because somewhere between orchestrating Isabella's escape and signing my name at that bureau, I'd made a fatal miscalculation. I'd planned every detail of getting my sister out, the timing, the lies, the backup stories. I'd thought about protecting my mother, about holding the alliance together, about surviving long enough to make sure no one hunted Isabella down. But I'd never thought past that, never let myself imagine what came after the signature dried on the marriage license. I'd saved my sister from a lifetime with a stranger, and in doing so, I'd locked myself into exactly that fate. The irony was almost funny, except I couldn't laugh, because the man in the next room wasn't just any stranger. He was intelligent, calculating, and far too perceptive. He'd seen through my deception in seconds, turned it into leverage, and now expected me to be his partner in holding together a criminal empire I barely understood. And worse, so much worse, some traitorous part of me had responded when he'd stepped close, when he'd said my real name in that low, deliberate voice, when he'd promised he wouldn't touch me until I wanted him to. I'd planned the rescue. I'd never planned for the possibility that I might actually want the man I'd trapped myself with. That realization kept me awake long after the lights went out. Act 3. The next evening, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in Dante's, our bedroom, trying to recognize myself. The dress was Isabella's style, not mine. Deep burgundy silk that clung to curves I usually hid under practical clothes, with a neckline that felt dangerously low. My hair was swept up in an elegant twist, my makeup carefully applied to match the photos Dante's family would have seen. I looked exactly like Isabella would have looked for this dinner, which meant I looked nothing like myself. Ready, Dante's voice came from behind me, and I turned to find him in a dark suit that made him look even more dangerous than usual. His gaze swept over me, lingering just long enough to make heat crawl up my neck, before, meeting my eyes. You look perfect. I look like her. You look like my wife, he corrected, which is what matters tonight. He crossed to where I stood and adjusted one of my earrings with careful fingers, the gesture oddly intimate. Remember what I told you about Franco? Pleasant but not weak, smart but not threatening. Deflect personal questions. Don't give him ammunition. Good. His hand dropped to my waist, steadying me. And Isabetta, if anything goes wrong, if you feel unsafe or cornered, you stay close to me. Understand? The use of my real name, spoken low enough that only I could hear it, sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear. Understood. We walked downstairs together, his hand remaining at the small of my back, in a gesture that anyone watching would read as husbandly affection. But I could feel the tension in his touch, the coiled readiness, like he was prepared to step between me and danger at any moment. The dining room was already full when we arrived. A long table set with crystal and silver, at least 15 people gathered in clusters, conversation flowing with the kind of careful politeness that barely masked suspicion and assessment. Every head turned when we entered. Everyone, Dante said, his voice carrying easily over the room. My wife, Isabella. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then a woman who had to be Adriana, young, dark-haired, with Dante's sharp cheekbones, broke into a warm smile and crossed to embrace me. Finally, she said, kissing both my cheeks. I was beginning to think my brother would never let us meet you. I'm Adriana. Welcome to the family. Thank you, I replied, channeling every bit of Isabella's practiced charm. Dante's told me so much about you. All good things, I hope. She linked her arm through mine and began introducing me to various cousins and associates. keeping up a stream of easy chatter that felt like a buffer against the weight of all those assessing stares. But I felt them anyway, especially the cold, evaluating gaze of the man who had to be Franco. He was exactly as Dante had described. Gray at the temples, impeccably dressed, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a heavy gold ring on his pinky finger bearing the family crest. He watched me the way a predator watches prey, looking for the moment of weakness, the stumble that would confirm I wasn't what I appeared to be. When Adriana finally led me to where he stood with an older woman and a younger man, Franco's smile widened. "The bride," he said, taking my hand and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that somehow felt like a threat. "How lovely! I'm Franco, Dante's uncle. This is my wife, Caterina, and my son, Luca." Caterina offered a tight smile. Luca looked me over with obvious interest that made my skin crawl. "It's wonderful to meet you all," I said, keeping my voice pleasant and even. "Thank you for welcoming me." Of course, Franco said, still holding my hand just a beat too long. Though I must admit, we were all surprised by how quickly the wedding came together. One might almost think there was a rush. The words landed like a knife between my ribs, but I forced myself to smile. "When you know, you know. Why wait?" Indeed, his gaze sharpened. "And your family? Your father must be pleased with the alliance." "Very pleased," I lied smoothly. "Though he's sad to lose a daughter, of course. I'm sure he is." Franco finally released my hand. "Tell me, how are you finding the adjustment? It must be quite different from your family's estate." "Different, yes, but Dante's made me feel very welcome." "Has he?" Franco's smile took on a knowing edge. How generous of him. Though I suppose generosity comes easily when the bride is as beautiful as you are. Before I could formulate a response that was polite but firm, Dante appeared at my side, his hand sliding possessively around my waist. "Uncle," he said, his tone pleasant but with an undercurrent of steel. "I hope you're not interrogating my wife before she's even had a drink." Franco laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Just getting to know the woman who's going to unite our families. Surely you can't object to that." "Not at all," Dante replied. "As long as everyone remembers she's under my protection." The emphasis on the last word was slight but unmistakable, and Franco's expression tightened. "Of course," Franco said. "Family protects family. That's how this works." Dante guided me away before Franco could say anything else, his hand firm at my waist. "You did well," he murmured as we moved toward the bar. "He was testing you." I got that impression. I accepted the wine he handed me, grateful for something to do with my shaking hands. "He doesn't like me. He doesn't like that I married for peace instead of power. You're a symbol of weakness in his eyes." Dante's gaze swept the room, cataloging positions and alliances with the efficiency of a general surveying a battlefield. "But you handled him perfectly. Polite, pleasant, didn't give him anything to use. He's going to keep pushing. Probably, which is why you stay close to me tonight." Dinner was an exercise in controlled tension. I was seated beside Dante at the head of the table, with Franco directly across from us and Adriana on my other side. The food was exquisite, course after course of perfectly prepared dishes, but I barely tasted any of it. I was too focused on monitoring conversations, reading body language, watching for the traps I knew were coming. They came during the fourth course, when Franco raised his wine glass and smiled across the table at me. "A toast," he announced, and the table fell silent. "To the bride. May she prove worthy of the family she's married into, and may she understand the weight of the responsibility she now carries." The words were perfectly polite, but the implication was clear. Prove yourself or be found wanting. I met his gaze steadily and raised my own glass. "Thank you, Franco. I hope to honor the trust both families have placed in this alliance, and to prove that partnership is stronger than division." Something flickered in Franco's eyes, surprise, maybe, or irritation, that I'd turned his veiled challenge into a statement about unity. Around the table, several people nodded approvingly, and I saw Dante's hand relax slightly on his wine glass. "Well said," Adriana murmured beside me. "He expected you to be intimidated." "Should I have been?" "Probably," she said with a small smile, "but I'm glad you weren't." The rest of dinner passed in a blur of careful conversation and calculated pleasantries. I answered questions about my family with vague platitudes, deflected inquiries about the rushed wedding, and managed to project an image of calm confidence I absolutely didn't feel. But I also watched. And I noticed things. I noticed how Franco's son, Luca, kept glancing at his father before speaking, like he needed permission. I noticed how certain men at the table deferred to Franco instead of Dante when discussing business matters. I noticed the way Franco's wife touched his arm twice during dinner, both times right before he said something particularly pointed. Most importantly, I noticed the man sitting 3 seats down from Franco. Older, quiet, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd been introduced as Marco Romano, Dante's consigliere, and he'd been watching me all evening with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was cataloging every word, every gesture, every micro-expression. When dinner finally ended and people began moving to the sitting room for coffee and digestives, Marco appeared at my elbow. "Mrs. Calabresi," he said, his voice cultured and measured. "Might I have a word?" I glanced at Dante, who gave an almost imperceptible nod, then followed Marco to a quieter corner of the room. "You did well tonight," Marco said without preamble. "Better than Franco expected." "Thank you. But you should know that he's going to dig deeper. He doesn't believe the marriage is what it appears to be." Marco's gaze was uncomfortably penetrating. He thinks Dante married in haste, possibly under pressure, and he's looking for proof that the alliance is weaker than it seems. My heart stuttered, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of proof? Anything that suggests you're not who you're supposed to be. Inconsistencies in your story. Signs that you and Dante aren't truly united. Evidence that your family is unhappy with the arrangement. He paused. "He's already sent men to make inquiries with your father's people." Ice slid down my spine. "When?" "Yesterday. They'll report back within the week." Marco studied my face. "Whatever you're hiding, Mrs. Calabresi, you'd better make sure it stays hidden. Because if Franco finds ammunition, he'll use it to destroy both you and Dante." "I'm not hiding anything," I said, the lie smooth and practiced. "Good," Marco said, but his expression suggested he didn't quite believe me. "Then you have nothing to worry about." He started to turn away, then paused. "One more thing. Franco's planning something for next week's family council. I don't know what yet, but he's been meeting privately with several of the senior members. If I were you, I'd make sure Dante is prepared for a challenge." "What kind of challenge?" "The kind that tests whether he's strong enough to lead this family." Marco's gaze was grave. "And whether you're the asset he claims you are, or the liability Franco believes you to be." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing alone with my racing thoughts. Franco was investigating. He was building a case against Dante's leadership, and he was doing it now, before I'd had time to establish myself, before the alliance had time to solidify. I needed to tell Dante immediately. I found him in his study an hour later, after the last guest had finally left. He was standing at the window with a glass of whiskey, his jacket discarded and his shirt sleeves rolled up, looking out over the dark vineyards. "We have a problem," I said without preamble. He turned, his expression sharpening. "Franco. Marco told me he sent men to investigate my family. They'll report back within a week." I crossed to where he stood, urgency making my words come fast. "And he's planning something for the family council, some kind of challenge to your leadership." Dante's jaw tightened. "What else did Marco say?" "That Franco doesn't believe our marriage is real, that he's looking for proof the alliance is weak." I met his gaze. "If his men talk to the wrong people, if they find Isabella's boyfriend or someone who knows we're twins, then we're both dead," Dante finished grimly. He set down his glass and turned to face me fully. "How much does your father know about where Isabella really is?" "Just that she left with Lorenzo, not where they went or how to find them." "And your mother?" "She helped plan the escape, but she doesn't have contact information. It was safer that way." Dante nodded slowly, thinking. "So the weak point is Isabella herself. If Franco's men find her, if they convince her to come back or testify about the switch." "She won't," I said with certainty. "She'd die before she'd betray me." "You'd better hope you're right." He paced to his desk, pulled out a leather-bound ledger and began flipping through pages. We need leverage, something that makes it more dangerous for Franco to move against us than to accept the status quo. What kind of leverage? Proof that he's not the loyal underboss he pretends to be. Evidence of deals that benefit him at the family's expense. Anything that makes the council question whether he's acting in the family's interest or his own. Dante looked up from the ledger. You said you noticed things at dinner. Tell me. I thought back through the evening, pulling up every observation I'd filed away. Luca defers to his father constantly. Franco's wife signals him before he speaks. Several men at the table look to Franco for approval, instead of you when discussing business. Which men? I named them. And watched Dante's expression grow darker. Those are the senior council members, the ones who vote on family matters. He closed the ledger. If Franco's already turned them, he has the votes to challenge my leadership. What happens if he challenges? The council decides whether I'm fit to lead. If they vote against me, I'm removed. Franco takes over. His gaze met mine. And the first thing he'll do is investigate everything about our marriage. When he finds out the truth, you die. Your mother probably dies. Isabella gets hunted down, and the alliance collapses. The weight of it pressed down on me like a physical thing. So we need to move first. Yes, but carefully. If we accuse Franco without proof, we look weak and paranoid. If we wait too long, he'll have already poisoned the council against us. Dante moved back to the window, his profile sharp in the dim light. We need to find out what he's hiding, and we need to do it before that family council. When is it? 5 days. 5 days. Less than a week to uncover secrets that Franco had probably spent years hiding, while also maintaining the perfect facade of Isabella and preventing his investigators from discovering the truth. Tell me what to do, I said. Dante turned to look at me, and something in his expression shifted. Tomorrow there's a luncheon. Wives and families only. Adriana will be there, and so will Katerina and several other women who've been in this family for decades. Go, be charming. Listen more than you talk. See what you can learn about Franco's business dealings, his habits, who he meets with. You want me to gather intelligence at a social lunch? I want you to do what you do best. Read the room, notice the patterns, collect the information no one thinks is important. He crossed to where I stood. You saw things tonight that I missed because I was too focused on Franco himself. You noticed the power dynamics, the subtle tells. That's your skill, Isabetta. Use it. The faith in his voice, the way he said my real name, made something warm unfurl in my chest, despite the danger pressing in from all sides. Okay, I said. I'll go. I'll listen. I'll find out what I can. If Franco was building a case against us, then I was going to build one against him, and I was done pretending I was just collateral in everyone else's war. Good. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb brushing across my cheek in a gesture that felt far too intimate for a marriage of convenience. You were incredible tonight. You walked into a room full of people waiting for you to fail, and you held your own against Franco without flinching. I was terrified the entire time. I know, that's what made it impressive. His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth before returning to my eyes, and the air between us suddenly felt charged. You're stronger than you think, Isabetta. Stronger than Isabella ever was. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him that this was a business arrangement, that the intimacy was just for show, that I couldn't afford to let my guard down. But I didn't step back. I stood there with his hand on my face and my heart pounding, and wondered when exactly I'd stop being able to lie to myself about what I felt when he looked at me like that. Dante, I whispered, not even sure what I was asking. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might close the distance, might kiss me the way his gaze promised he wanted to. But then he released me and stepped back, putting careful space between us. Get some rest, he said, his voice rougher than before. Tomorrow starts early, and we both need to be sharp. He walked out before I could respond, leaving me alone in his study with my racing pulse and the terrifying realization that 5 days might not be nearly enough time to untangle the danger we were in, or to untangle what I was starting to feel for the man I'd accidentally married. Act 4. The luncheon was held at Katerina's estate, a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa that dripped with old money and older grudges. I arrived with Adriana, grateful for her running commentary about which women to avoid and which might actually be useful allies. Katerina will try to make you uncomfortable, Adriana murmured as we walked up the stone path to the entrance. She's Franco's wife, which means she's Franco's weapon. But the others, Angela, Sophia, Maria, they're tired of the fighting. They lost sons and brothers in the feud. If you can show them you're serious about the alliance, they might support you. And if they don't, then we're walking into a room full of enemies with very expensive wine glasses. Adriana squeezed my arm. But you handled dinner last night. You can handle this. The villa's interior was all arched doorways and carefully curated art, with a terrace overlooking vineyards that probably produced wine worth more than my childhood home. Katerina greeted us at the terrace entrance, her smile sharp as cut glass. Isabella, how lovely you could join us. I wasn't sure you'd feel comfortable among so many new faces. I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone, I replied smoothly. Dante speaks so highly of the family. For the next hour, she tried to prove I didn't belong. Every introduction came with a story I couldn't possibly remember, a reference to some decade-old event I hadn't lived, a question designed to expose what I didn't know. It should have worked, but I'd spent my life reading rooms and managing volatile people, so I listened more than I talked. I asked about their children, their businesses, the funerals they were tired of attending. Angela, who'd lost 2 sons in the feud, softened when I said I hoped this alliance meant no more waking up to black dresses. Sophia relaxed when I asked about her daughter's wedding. Maria lit up when I mentioned I preferred logistics to being in front of a camera. Practical, Maria said approvingly. We need more of that. How fortunate that Dante found someone so practical, Katerina cut in. The word edged like a blade. I consider it a compliment, I said. Practical keeps people alive. Does it? Her smile tightened. I would have thought passion and loyalty kept people alive, but perhaps your family does things differently. Before I could answer, Adriana slipped in smoothly. Passion without strategy just gets people killed faster. Isabella's right. Practical is what ends feuds. Isn't that what we all want? Several women murmured agreement. Katerina heard it too. Something hardened in her eyes. When she stood to refill her glass, she gestured for me to follow. You're smarter than you look, she said quietly once we were out of earshot. But being smart isn't always enough. My husband has been building his position for years. Allies, favors, patience. Dante is young and impulsive, and this rushed marriage reeks of desperation. Or strategy, I countered. Ending a war that was bleeding both families seems strategic to me. Does it? She leaned closer, her pleasant mask dropping. Franco knows things about this marriage, Isabella. Things that would be very damaging if they came out. My heart stopped, but I kept my expression neutral. What things? Let's just say he has questions about the timeline, about why the wedding happened so quickly, about certain inconsistencies. Her smile was pure venom. He's a thorough man. He doesn't make accusations without proof. But when he has that proof, he acts decisively. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me gripping the terrace railing with hands that wanted to shake. Franco knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to be dangerous. And if Katerina was threatening me this openly, it meant Franco's investigation was further along than we'd thought. I needed to get back to Dante immediately, but I forced myself to stay, to finish the luncheon with perfect composure, to say gracious goodbyes and accept invitations to future gatherings. Only when Adriana and I were finally back in the car did I let my careful control slip. Katerina threatened me, I said quietly. She said Franco has proof of inconsistencies about the marriage. Adriana's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Then he's closer than we thought. My brother needs to know. We intercepted Dante at the winery's private tasting room. The moment he saw my face, his expression shifted from charming host to cold calculation. I told him everything, Katerina's warning, the mention of proof, the confidence in her threat. Dante listened without interrupting, his jaw clenched. He's moving faster than I expected, he said when I finished. So we stopped pretending we're just watching him. We move first. 20 minutes later, Marco arrived at the estate. The four of us, Dante, Marco, Adriana, and me, spent an hour turning Katerina's threat into a plan. Franco kept a private office in his wing of the main compound. Tomorrow night, during the council dinner, Dante would slip away to search it. My job was to keep the room's attention on me, especially Franco's, with a toast no one could ignore. If Dante was going to risk everything by breaking into Franco's sanctum, then I was going to risk everything by painting a target right on my own back. By the time Marco left, my head was spinning with contingencies and backup plans. Dante walked me up to our bedroom, his hand at my back in that gesture that had become familiar, and I realized we were running out of time for everything, for finding proof, for stopping Franco, for figuring out what we were to each other beyond this desperate alliance. My breath caught. We were standing so close, I could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the heat radiating off his body. His hand came up to cup my face, and I knew, absolutely knew, that if I didn't step back, "You don't have to do this," Dante said quietly when we were alone. I could have Marco create a distraction, find another way to search Franco's office. "No," I said. "We do this together. That's the whole point, isn't it? We're stronger united than divided." Something in his expression softened. "When did you start believing that?" "Probably somewhere between you signing that marriage license and trusting me to gather intelligence at a luncheon full of enemies." I managed a small smile. "You keep treating me like a partner instead of a liability. It's hard not to believe it when you do. You were never a liability, Isabetta." He moved closer, and the air between us suddenly felt charged with everything we'd been carefully not acknowledging. "You walked into the worst situation imaginable, and you've handled it with more intelligence and courage than most men in my organization could manage. You're not Isabella's shadow. You're—" He stopped, seeming to search for words. "I'm what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mine," he said roughly. "Not because I trapped you into this, not because we're legally bound, but because somewhere between that courthouse and tonight, I stopped seeing you as a solution to a problem and started seeing you as the only person I actually trust." I didn't step back. "Dante," I whispered, and his name on my lips seemed to break whatever restraint he'd been holding. He kissed me like he'd been thinking about it for days, which maybe he had. His mouth was hot and demanding, his hands sliding into my hair to angle my head exactly where he wanted it. I made a sound I'd be embarrassed about later and pressed closer, my hands fisting in his shirt, every nerve ending suddenly awake and screaming for more. He walked me backward until my spine hit the wall, his body pinning me there, and the solid weight of him against me made my knees actually weak. His mouth moved from my lips to my jaw, to the sensitive spot below my ear, and when his teeth scraped lightly over my pulse point, I gasped. "Tell me to stop," he said against my throat, his voice wrecked. "Tell me this is a bad idea and we should focus on surviving tomorrow." "It is a bad idea," I managed. "We absolutely should stop." "But we're not going to," he said. And it wasn't a question. "No," I agreed, pulling his mouth back to mine. "We're really not." His hands found the zipper of my dress, sliding it down with agonizing slowness, while his mouth did absolutely devastating things to my neck and collarbone. I tugged his shirt free from his pants, desperate to feel skin, and when my hands finally made contact with the warm, muscled planes of his back, he groaned. "Isabetta," he said, my real name a prayer and a curse. "You're going to destroy me." "Good," I said, and meant it. Somewhere between the wall and the bed, we lost most of our clothes. His shirt, my dress. He paused to look at me. "Are you sure?" I was sure of almost nothing, not whether we'd survive tomorrow, not whether Franco would destroy us, not whether this marriage was real or performance. But I was absolutely certain about this. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." He kissed me again, slower this time but no less intense, and when we finally came together, it felt like a promise neither of us had the words to speak out loud. That we were in this together, that whatever happened tomorrow, we'd face it as partners, that somewhere in the chaos of deception and danger, we'd found something real. Afterward, I lay tangled with him in the darkness, his arm heavy across my waist, his breathing gradually evening out. I should have been thinking about tomorrow's council dinner, about Franco's threat, about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Instead, I found myself thinking about what Dante had said. Mine. Not because he'd trapped me, but because I'd somehow become someone he trusted. Someone he saw. "What are you thinking about?" His voice was rough with exhaustion and satisfaction. "That I came here planning to save my sister, and I never planned for this." "For what?" "For wanting to stay." I turned in his arms to face him. "For wanting this to be real." His hand came up to trace my cheek in the darkness. "It is real, Isabetta. Whatever else is performance, this isn't. Even if Franco exposes us tomorrow? Even then." His arms tightened around me. "We survive tomorrow, and then we figure out the rest." It should have felt like a naive promise, given everything stacked against us. But lying there in the dark with him, I let myself believe it anyway. We survived tomorrow, and then we figured out the rest. The council dinner the next evening was held in the main family compound's formal dining hall, a space designed to intimidate, with vaulted ceilings and portraits of dead patriarchs glaring down from the walls. Every senior family member was present, along with their wives, creating a crowd of at least 40 people, all watching to see how the power dynamics would shift. I wore a dress that Dante had chosen, deep emerald silk that made me look both elegant and formidable. My hair was up, my makeup perfect, and I'd spent 20 minutes practicing the toast I was about to give. The toast that would keep every eye on me while Dante slipped away to search Franco's office. Franco sat across from us, Caterina beside him, both wearing expressions of barely concealed anticipation. They thought tonight would be my downfall. They were counting on it. I was counting on proving them wrong. The dinner progressed through multiple courses, conversation carefully neutral, everyone waiting for the moment when tradition dictated I would stand to give my toast as the newest wife. Dante's hand rested on my thigh under the table, a grounding touch. And when the moment finally came, he squeezed gently. "Now," he murmured, too quiet for anyone else to hear. I stood, and the room fell silent. Every face turned toward me, some curious, some skeptical. Franco's openly hostile. "Thank you all for welcoming me into this family," I began, keeping my voice clear and steady. "I know that trust must be earned, and that words matter less than actions, so I won't waste your time with platitudes about unity and peace." Franco's expression flickered with interest. He'd expected empty sentiment. I was giving him something else. "Instead, I want to talk about what I've learned in the short time I've been here. I've learned that this family is powerful because it's ruthless when necessary and strategic when possible. I've learned that loyalty is the currency that matters most, and that betrayal, whether from outside or inside, is the only unforgivable sin." Several people shifted in their seats. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dante slip quietly from the room. No one else seemed to notice. My marriage to Dante was meant to end a war that cost both families blood and treasure. Some of you have questioned whether that was wisdom or weakness, whether choosing peace was the act of a strong leader or a desperate one. I paused, letting the words settle. I understand the doubt, but I also understand that the men and women in this room are smart enough to recognize the difference between strategic patience and cowardice. Franco's eyes narrowed. He knew I was talking about him, about his challenges to Dante's leadership. Dante didn't choose peace because he was weak. He chose it because he was strong enough to prioritize the family's future over his own pride. My gaze swept the room, meeting eyes, holding attention. And I didn't marry into this family to be decorative. I came here to be useful, to bring my skills, my resources, and my absolute loyalty to strengthening what we're building together. I raised my glass. "So here's my promise to you. I will work every day to prove I'm worthy of the trust you've placed in me and in this alliance. And to anyone who thinks they can drive a wedge between Dante and me, or between our families, I say this: you will fail, because we're stronger together than anyone is alone, and we'll fight like hell to protect what we've built." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then Marco raised his glass. "To partnership," he said firmly. "To partnership," several others echoed. And suddenly the room was full of raised glasses and murmured approval. All except Franco, who sat perfectly still, his expression cold with calculation. I just declared war, and everyone in the room knew it. Dante was gone for exactly 12 minutes. I counted every one of them, maintaining conversation and deflecting questions while my heart hammered and my hands stayed perfectly steady on my wine glass. When he finally slipped back into the room and reclaimed his seat beside me, his hand immediately found mine under the table. "Got it," he murmured, too quiet for anyone else to hear. His expression was controlled, but I could feel the tension vibrating through him. Franco had noticed his absence. I could see it in the way his gaze sharpened, in the slight tilt of his head as he tracked Dante's return. But he said nothing, just watched us with that predator's patience. The dinner dragged on another hour, dessert, coffee, carefully neutral conversation. By the time people finally began to leave, my nerves were wound so tight I thought I might shatter. Dante guided me out with his hand at my back, nodding goodbyes until we were finally in his car with the doors closed and privacy restored. "Show me," I said immediately. He pulled a slim folder from his jacket and opened it. Inside were photographs, clearly taken with his phone in Franco's office, of ledgers, documents, and what looked like contracts. "Franco's been skimming," Dante said, his voice hard with controlled fury. "He set up shell companies to siphon family profits. He's been doing it for at least 3 years, maybe longer. These documents show payments to council members, bribes to secure their votes. And this?" He flipped to another photo. "This is a contract with our oldest rival family. Franco's been selling them information about our routes and shipments." "That's treason," I breathed. "That's a death sentence," Dante corrected. "If the council sees this, Franco's done. He won't just lose his position, he'll lose everything." "When will you present it?" "The council reconvenes tomorrow morning for the formal vote on my leadership. Franco was planning to use whatever proof he has about you to argue I'm unfit. Instead," his smile was sharp and dangerous, "instead, I'm going to destroy him." We drove home in tense silence, both of us knowing that tomorrow would decide everything. In our bedroom, Dante spread the documents across his desk and began making copies, building his case with meticulous precision. I watched him work, this man I'd accidentally married, and realized, with startling clarity, that I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Franco, not of exposure, not of what tomorrow would bring. Because whatever happened, we'd face it together. "Dante," I said quietly. He looked up from the documents. "Thank you for trusting me, for seeing me as more than just a substitute for Isabella." "You were never a substitute," he said. "You were always exactly who I needed." He crossed to where I stood and pulled me against him, his arms solid and warm. "Tomorrow we end this, and then we figure out the rest," I finished. "Yes," he agreed. "We figure out the rest." The council meeting the next morning felt more like a trial than a discussion. Every senior member was present, along with Marco and several family lawyers. Franco sat at one end of the table, confident and composed. Dante sat at the other, with me beside him, a deliberate choice that made it clear we were a united front. Franco opened exactly as we'd expected. He questioned the rushed marriage, suggested Dante had acted impulsively, hinted at inconsistencies that needed investigation. He circled our lie without quite touching it, saving whatever he thought he had for a dramatic reveal. Then Dante stood. "Before we continue," he said, his voice carrying easily, "the council needs to see this." He passed out copies of the photos he'd taken in Franco's office. Shell companies, skimmed profits, quiet payments to key council members, and finally, a contract selling information to our oldest rival. I watched Franco's face go from smug to ashen in seconds. "These documents show that Uncle Franco has been betraying this family for years," Dante said. "If we're talking about who's unfit to lead, we start there." The room erupted. For nearly 3 hours, men shouted, demanded explanations, tried to spin what was in black and white. Franco denied, then minimized, then tried to drag others down with him. But the evidence was too much. By the time the dust settled, Franco had been stripped of his position, his assets, and his protection. He wasn't killed, but he was finished. Dante's leadership was confirmed by unanimous vote. We left the compound together, exhausted and victorious. In the car, Dante reached for my hand. "It's over," he said. "Franco's done. The threat is gone." "What about his investigation into me?" I asked. "Whatever proof he thought he had?" "He never had proof," Dante said. "He was fishing, hoping to find something. But without his position, without his resources, he can't hurt us now." He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. "You're safe, Isabetta. Your mother's safe. Isabella's safe." The relief was so profound I felt dizzy with it. We'd survived. Against all odds, against Franco's machinations and Caterina's threats, we'd survived. "So what happens now?" I asked. Dante pulled into our estate and parked, then turned to face me. "Now we stop pretending. No more Isabella, no more performance, just us." "Us," I repeated. "Isabetta and Dante. Yes." He cupped my face in his hands. "I want a real marriage, Isabetta. Not because we're trapped in it, but because I choose you. Because you're brilliant and brave and you walked into hell without flinching. Because somewhere between that courthouse and now, I fell in love with you." My breath caught. "You love me." "Terrifyingly," he admitted. "So the question is, do you want this? Do you want us? Because if you don't, if you want to walk away and build a life somewhere else, I'll make sure you're protected and provided for. But if you stay, it's because you're choosing me back." I thought about Isabella in Paris, free and in love. I thought about the girl I'd been before, always in the background, always sacrificing. And I thought about the woman I'd become in the last week, confident, capable, seen. "I choose you," I said. "I choose us. I choose this dark, complicated, dangerous world as long as you're in it with me." He kissed me then, deep and claiming and full of promise. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calabresi," he murmured. "The real one this time." "Home," I agreed, and meant it with every part of myself. I'd come here to save my sister. I'd stayed because I'd found something better. Partnership, purpose, and a love I'd never planned for, but would fight like hell to keep. In the end, being the wrong twin had led me to exactly the right life. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe so you don't miss the next Mafia love story. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you thought of this narrator. Your feedback really helps me make these even better for you. Thank you for letting my stories keep you company. It truly means more than you know.